use Thomas Sanderson as best we can for his expertise while he's here. Let's go to Nancy in Logan, Ohio, on our line for Independence. Nancy, good morning.
It's good to talk to you today. Combating violent extremism. First, it has to be identified, I believe, and I don't believe it's ever been identified in the last 5 or 6 years what it is. I think you have to call it what it is, okay? One example is Egypt. You know, our government was just jumping up, cheering because Morsi was elected over there, okay, democratically elected, and then we find out what he was, okay? And the same thing here. And ISIS, we got to call them what. How can you fight something if you don't call it what it is? Now, I'm listening. You don't have to listen to news media. You can just listen to when the president's up there, when his cabinet's up there. Just listen to what they're saying. And what are they saying? Not too much. And in fact, right now in our country, we're afraid of ISIS here. What did we just see happen out west? What did we just see happen? Now, in the government...
Well, Thomas Sanderson, I want you to pick up on that point,
Sure.
The concerns about ISIS attacks here in the United States. Are they overstated, understated?
Well, it's very difficult to tell. You know, during the during the Iraq War, we were concerned about the few thousand foreign fighters that had come to Iraq to fight U.S.-led coalition forces. We thought that they would come to the United States, come to Europe, and go to other states that were allied with us and attack. That shoe never really dropped. There were certainly efforts by individuals to attack inside the United States. The FBI and local and state law enforcement have done a spectacular job of blocking those plots, but it never materialized in the way that we thought. This threat, I think, is more significant. Again, you have fighters from over 80 countries who are in the region fighting, not all of them for ISIS, but quite a few of them. 3,000 Europeans and over 100 Americans who have gone to Syria. Now, those individuals can come back, they can conduct operations. It does not take a lot of coordination to do that. It can be an individual who does it, but very importantly, among those 3,000 Europeans, you very likely have hundreds, if not thousands, who are from visa waiver countries. Now, there are 38 countries that are part of the visa waiver program. They do not need to go into the U.S. Embassy in their capital to have an interview to get a visa to travel to the United States, the UK, Britain, Belgium, Germany, Belgium, etc. 30 of the 38 visa waiver countries are European, so there's very likely that many of these fighters are able to return to Europe and get on a plane to the United States without having to sit down for an interview in the U.S. Embassy. That leaves the officer at Dulles Airport or elsewhere to make that decision as to whether this individual is a threat. That's a tall order.
Some numbers from the Wall Street Journal today on the number of Europeans who have fought with militants in Syria and Iraq. Some of those countries are those visa waiver countries you're talking about, like France, with 700 citizens who have fought with militants in Syria and Iraq, Britain with 500, and then other members as well included on that list in today's Wall Street Journal. But in terms of immediate threats to the United States, there seemed to be some comments last week of more concern even about the shadowy Khorasan group not connected with ISIS. Can you explain what that group is and what those concerns were?
Sure. First of all, the group, there's not much information out there known about them, but this is essentially a caravan of al-Qaeda operatives who came from South and Central Asia, so from the lower stands and into Afghanistan and Pakistan, who traveled to the region, to Syria, to engage in planning and operations. And it was believed that they posed an incredibly high threat last week, but then you've since heard the degree of the threat being knocked down a bit, that they in fact were not posing such a threat. So it's always difficult to know exactly what kind of threat they pose. And right now there's a lot of talk about the group. Seems that the leader was killed, likely, and I think it was good to target them, though the degree to which they were a threat is unknown. But you do have, you know, more than 100 Americans who've traveled. The figure I heard last night were at least 12 people fighting directly now for ISIS. So those individuals are going to be fired up, motivated, trained in bomb making, in surveillance and counter surveillance, and they're going to come back to a country where they potentially feel marginalized, certainly having felt empowered by what they did in the region and seeing the U.S. now at the vanguard of the coalition to destroy ISIS, you can certainly see it's likely that they may want to seek to conduct operations in the country.
Let's go to Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Barbara is waiting on our line for Democrats. Barbara, did I get that right?
Cape Girardeau.
There you go. Go ahead.
Good morning. What I want to ask is, why is it, without the support of the world's greatest military, the United States, ISIS is able to just walk through that area and do whatever they choose? And why is it, after 12 years of supposed training, money, military support from the United States, we can't train people in Iraq to fight off enemies that are right in their own yard? I want to know why ISIS is so powerful and these people that we train are so weak. And the other question is, what's in it for the United States? Really, what's in it for the United States? It looks like to me our goal is to demilitarize every country in the Middle East except Israel, and then we can walk in there and take over the oil.
A couple questions from Barbara there.
Sure, absolutely. So why is ISIS so capable? One, they are battle-hardened. This is a group that has been fighting for quite some time, from very early days after 9/11 through today in Syria. So they have a lot of skills. But very importantly, they went up against an Iraqi security force, which, as the caller points out, Barbara, we spent $25 billion training and equipping this force. And ISIS scared the uniforms right off the backs of these guys when they went into Mosul. Now, why was that? Well, because once Prime Minister Maliki took office, he started to marginalize Sunnis and he started to hollow out the military, getting rid of good Sunni officers and putting in loyalists. Now, loyalists are there not to fight. They're there to benefit financially and politically from their position in the military. So you hollow out the military and bring in only Shias in prominent positions, and then you have distrust among some of the Sunni fighters, Sunni members of the Iraqi security forces. So this was a political problem and remains a political problem. Even though Maliki is gone and Abadi is in there now, we don't know where this is going to head. So the training was effective at the time, but without the U.S. there constantly babysitting, you're not going to have the same kind of stiffened spine that they may have had before.
York, Pennsylvania's next. Matt is on our line for Republicans. Matt, good morning.
Hey, good morning. What's funny is, as I was listening on the phone, the majority of my questions have been answered. But I will thank you for the foreign policy delivery here, which I believe to be largely accurate. The one thing I want to mention, though, and I was just going to make a statement now because the southern border questions were pretty much resolved here. I get your take on that, sir. But I'm just concerned that voters still haven't gotten it. We're coming into a cycle now where the question of illegal immigration could impact a lot of the swing elections that are taking place. And I know you're not domestic policy, but your foreign policy. The illegal immigration is still a gigantic issue, and that's all part of your expertise, I believe. So if you could maybe elaborate a bit on your take.
Well, I don't have a lot to say about the immigration debate. I will say that over the past few years, people felt that Al-Qaeda and other groups might try to use a weak southern border in the United States to infiltrate individuals, and the FBI was focused on this for quite some time. I don't believe it was ever a significant threat, though we certainly don't know every person that's come into the country. It does remain a potential problem, but with the visa waiver program, these individuals can fly directly to the United States and not take the risk of going to Mexico, perhaps getting kidnapped or killed, or captured by the police and the border police. So either way, they can get in the country. It's not easy to do it, but it's doable.
Is there any thought to revamping the visa waiver program in light of these latest threats?
Well, there's certainly a lot of pressure to keep it open because it facilitates a lot of business travel and tourism and other things. I think it just is up to those individuals who are excellent at our airports to detect individuals who are coming in, to, of course, look clearly at their passports to see where they've traveled. Unfortunately, they can enter through the Turkish border or other ways and not have their passports stamped, and so that's not going to be an indicator necessarily. But these men and women who are at the border here, air and sea borders and land borders, they're well trained and they are good at picking up threats.
We're talking about the threats posed by ISIS. We showed this headline earlier today, Boehner airstrikes, not enough, talking about the possibility of U.S. troops on the ground, boots on the ground, fighting ISIS. Fizz Guy on our Twitter page says, if we put troops on the ground, ISIL will already have won. Each American killed will just add to their victory in their mind. We're talking with Thomas Sanderson of CSIS to talk about these issues. Let's go to Sarab waiting in Durham, North Carolina, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is about the authorization for the use of military force. I think one of the political lessons of the 2001 AUMF was that Democratic politicians who aligned themselves with the AUMF would bear a fairly heavy political cost. And I think the 2008 election showed that was true. And then in the general election, Republicans it was used against the Republican Party in talking points as well. So given that political cost exists, is there any incentive to revisit for Congress to revisit the AUMF now? And if not, what does that say about the political legitimacy and the ongoing congressional approval for military action in the future?
Well, my sense is that many people are loath to revisit it because they want the elections to take place without that conversation. And of course, Democrats are put into a difficult position because their president is saying, I have the authorization and I don't need it to go forward. So I think they'd rather let the president be the flak magnet for political opposition over the AUMF rather than themselves and having to put themselves on record to vote for it.
One Democrat talking about this, though, yesterday on the Sunday shows, Democrat Tim Kaine of Virginia. Here's what he had to say on CBS's Face the Nation.
I think the president's definition of the mission has been careful, and that's why I've introduced an authorization to essentially authorize the mission as he described it with some key limitations. And I also think the administration has done a great job of bringing together the multinational coalition. But we're not supposed to start a war without Congress. I'm sitting in the Capitol that Thomas Jefferson designed here in Virginia. He, James Madison, George Mason, and others who participated in the drafting of the Constitution made a critical break from previous history where war was a matter for the monarch or the executive and said that war should not be started without Congress. The reason they did it? We shouldn't be putting our servicemen and women in harm's way if there's not a political consensus that the mission is worth it. So I think the president's assertion that he can do this, I think he does not have the Article 2 constitutional authority to do this entire mission without Congress, and neither of the authorizations passed by Congress in 2001 or 2002 cover it. We should be debating and voting on this entire mission.
Well, Mr. Sanderson, you said yep at the end
yes.
there. Talk about your take on Tim Kaine.
I agree with Tim Kaine. Even if the president is able to argue that he has authorization, I think that anytime you make a significant move towards warfare, and this is some level of warfare, no doubt about it.
Are we at war?
I don't think so yet, but I think that we're getting close to it. We have 1,600 people on the ground there. That's a pretty significant number. At some point, they will be engaged in direct action. I'm certain of it, because they will be out there with Iraqi security forces. There will be some movement on the battlefield that ends up with them being engaged in direct firefight. So I think we're getting close there. But we've seen over the years a tremendous marginalization of Congress, and therefore the voice of the American people, as the former governor says, to weigh in on the use of forces, and that should be done, I believe, simply because reinforcing that role, I think, is important for the country moving forward.
Let's go to Abdul, waiting in Owings Mill, Maryland, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Thomas Sanderson. I want to thank you for your insights.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask you if you're familiar with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. This is an organization that has a long-established caliphate. They also have a presence in 206 countries, including mosques in 70 cities here in the United States. But most importantly, we are a community of peaceful Muslims. Our motto is love for all, hatred for none, and we believe in a jihad of the pen and not the sword. Are you familiar with us, and what role do you think that we can play in helping to combat this cancer called ISIS?
Great. Thank you very much, Abdul. First of all, I am familiar with Ahmadiyya because of the trouble that Ahmadiyya's had in Indonesia over the years, where some extremists in Indonesia, which is a largely Sufi-dominated Muslim country, Muslim majority country, the largest in the world actually, but there have been some extremists there who've looked at Ahmadiyya as a heretical sect. And I don't know enough about them, but my sense is that those extremists in Indonesia are off base. To answer your question, Abdul, on what sort of role Ahmadiyya could have here, I think anytime some element of the larger Muslim community of over 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide weighs in on the extreme brutality that's being perpetrated in the name of Islam and shows that how wrong that is, that's an important role to play. But I can't come up with a specific role for you to engage in. But I think that general sense of saying, look, this is not Islam, as the president has pointed out at the UN speech, is an important thing to do. And I think there are a lot of voices out there within the Muslim community who are afraid to speak up in the midst of such extreme brutality.
And Abdul, stick around for our next segment of the Washington Journal this morning. We're going to be talking about that specific subject with the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council here in the United States. But we've got about 15 minutes left with Thomas Anderson as we talk about the strategy to take on ISIS and ISIS strategy as well in their efforts in Iraq and Syria. Bill is in Boyertown, Pennsylvania on our line for Republicans. Bill, good morning.
Good morning to you guys. I don't know. It seems to me like you have this title where you're looking at transnational extremists and threats. And my comment is, don't you really think that the United States is the transnational threat? I don't see any people in my community that were injured by terrorists. I see people in the community that were injured as a result of our government sending them into harm's way. I'm going to give you a little example. I don't go down to North Philadelphia on Susquehanna, Diamond, and Allegheny Avenues and try to boss the people around there because I know it's a bad neighborhood. So I stay out of bad neighborhoods. How about speaking to that? Aren't we really the transnational threat as our government intervening in these people's their fights in their land?
Sure.
And Mr. Sanderson, as you do that, can you talk a little bit about CSIS and the work you do there?
Absolutely. First of all, CSIS, we were formed out of Georgetown University. It's where we began during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are a bipartisan organization with around 250 individuals at our Rhode Island Avenue headquarters. We cover all the world's major populated regions. We have functional programs on terrorism and technology, homeland security, trade, and then we have geographic programs. We have a Russia chair, we have a China program, a Europe, America's program, Africa, and we cover all of these regions. And what we try to do is do independent research with a wide range of sources so that we can develop insights and perspectives meant to bring greater knowledge to policymakers who are grappling with all of these issues and who may not have the time or staff to do this kind of research. So we do this research, and we believe that it is rigorous research, and we bring it to those folks in government to help them make better foreign policy decisions. But importantly, we also engage with the broader public through C-SPAN, through other media outlets. We host thousands of events every year, public roundtables at CSIS, so people are welcome to come in. You can come onto our website, and we're a very open organization. We are proud of the role that we have in bringing greater understanding of global trends, threats, opportunities, and challenges to the American people, but also to the globe overall. So to Bill's comment, I clearly don't agree that the U.S. is a transnational threat. We are in this position right now, one, because inevitably the United States is the most involved nation in the world. To harken back to Madeleine Albright's comment, we are the indispensable nation, the indispensable power, and if we are not there to help settle some of these disputes, either nobody will, or other actors that are very disruptive will come in and try to do the same. We went in to defend Yazidis on that mountaintop a few months ago. We also had ISIS forces with artillery and mortars within range of our consulate in Erbil. They took over Mosul. And let's also be frank here, Iraq is a big oil producer, number 2 in OPEC, 5th largest crude reserves in the world. They are a key component of the world economy, and given the direction that oil consumption is heading, not having Iraq's 3 million plus barrels per day would bring about some instability in the market. So that's one of the reasons. There are more reasons, and we have a role. We have a lot of allies in the region that are under threat to some degree, and we need to be a part of that.
Prescott, Arizona is next. Lenny is waiting on our line for Democrats. Lenny, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Sanderson, and good morning, C-SPANers. Pardon my cynicism, but endless money forms the sinews of war, said the great General Smedley Butler. My question to you is this. My background is TV network news. I worked for KABC TV in the 80s, number 2 network market. And we saw the Contra-Sandinista reversal where President Reagan was saying the Contras were the equivalent of the Founding Fathers, when in fact they were the murderous death squads and the Sandinistas were the more democratic forces, needless to say. But my question to you is this. Apparently this ISIS group has taken over a city of 2 million people, Mosul, a very cosmopolitan city, has an international airport, 4- and 5-star hotels. Are you telling me and the American people that a bunch of barbarians who suddenly have diplomatic powers to take over airports, police precincts, radio, TV stations, munitions, government buildings, are you saying those guys are in charge of that city for real? And my second part of it is, I understand that CSIS, I read in the New York Times and saw the interview, that some of your scholars have been writing position papers for foreign governments, have been caught doing that and paid to do so. Could you explain both those things to we the people? Thank you. I'll take my answer offline.
Great. Thank you, Lenny. I'll address your second question first. The CSIS has a very transparent, open funding arrangement with a lot of supporters. And the New York Times article was not well done, and Dr. John Hamre has been right out in front of this issue, and I would say for certain that was an inaccurate article as far as suggesting that our scholars do research directly in support of positions for foreign countries. Absolutely not true. Let me get to the first question. ISIS taking over Mosul. Yes, this is a group that is brutal. They are incredibly vicious, but they are highly organized. They have tens of thousands of fighters and administrators who govern large parts of Syria and Iraq, these major cities, Mosul and other places. They are efficient. They are brutal. They know how to run cities. They are in charge of water, sanitation. They have a very durable, varied portfolio of revenue streams, from oil to the sale of antiquities, stolen antiquities, to kidnap for ransom. They're bad people, but they know how to run cities. Sometimes they overdo it, but nonetheless, this is a serious threat, not only because of their fighting capability, but they can hold territory and govern territory.
How are they able to gather all those people with all that expertise, and yet there not be more warnings about the rising power of this group, or that it was such a surprise for the Iraqi army?
Well, again, I don't think it was a total surprise that they had these individuals, but also the increase in numbers of people on their side has been very sudden over just the last 2 months. So that happened very quickly, and often happens when you have victories like this. First of all, they're taking over land where there are people there, and they threaten people, but also people are interested in joining them and working with them because they see them replacing a corrupt government or a completely inept or absentee government in Iraq and in Syria. So there are people who are motivated to join them and to work with them, but they do have bureaucrats and technocrats who can run a city, and they've shown themselves to be effective in doing that.
Hamilton, Texas, next. Pat is calling on our line for Republicans. Pat, good morning.
How are you? I watched with interest as the people got all upset and turned on a dime when they saw the beheadings of 2 Americans and journalists and then the British and so forth. And I got to thinking about it. I live down here in a ranch in the middle of Texas, but I see a lot going on down here on the border that I think people are totally misguided about what's going on. And I got to thinking, let's put a hypothetical out there. Let's say a horde of let's call them terrorists, storm the border and take over some ranches and some communities and start beheading people left, right, and center before anybody can get to them and destroy them. And I thought, who would the American people get angry at? Would they get mad as a terrorist? I'm awfully afraid that they're going to get mad at our government, and that's very, very dangerous. And I just don't understand why people don't give this border more importance, because it's wide open. I don't care what you say, it is wide open. And if something like that, dreadful like that, were to happen, I'm afraid of what the American people they vent their frustrations on, and I'm worried about it.
Pat proposing a hypothetical there.
Sure. I think the scenario is very unlikely, but she does bring up a good point. We should have secure borders in the country, and I'm not going to weigh into the overall immigration debate here, but every country should have control over its borders for security purposes. And but I don't anticipate any sort of horde of terrorists coming over the border like that. But nonetheless, there are still possibilities that individuals can go over the land border or come in through the airports, through the visa waiver program or otherwise, and inflict pain on American people.
What is the hypothetical that Homeland Security officials are most concerned about? Is it lone wolf type of attack, something more coordinated, something on the scale of 9/11?
Yeah, I would say 9/11 is not on the table as a significant threat right now. That would be incredibly difficult to pull off. But the lone wolf threat is definitely an issue, and these individuals do not have to have traveled to Syria or Iraq to fight. They can be radicalized here at home and heed the call of ISIS or of Al-Qaeda to attack the United States wherever and whenever they can. But I do think that those individuals who travel to the region and gain all of those battlefield skills in that street credibility, in that sense of empowerment and purpose, can come back and do a lot of damage.
From Pat in Texas to Nat in Baltimore, Maryland, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
Good morning. My question, Mr. Sanderson, is, oh, excuse me, I'm a World War II vet, and I'm 87, so you got to excuse some of this interruption. But I'm an avid reader of Foreign Affairs, the magazine. And 2 years ago and last year, they had no fewer than 4 articles which described ISIS. They didn't call it ISIS, but they described it as an alternative government which is forming within and outside of Al-Qaeda. I believe that the president's comment about them being a JV team, I think he was talking about our intelligence and our administration. Unfortunately, I don't see anything that came out of your organization that emphasized what I read very clearly in Foreign Affairs.
Okay. Well, for a very long time, we have been following ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and as many terror groups as possible, not just in my program, but in other programs. So we've had very, very good coverage on these groups. We've been looking at the threat that they pose, talking about it, and meeting with members of government, both at CSIs and in the halls of government, testifying on Capitol Hill as to the degree and nature of the threat that we are facing and have been facing. So I can't speak to the specific articles in Foreign Affairs that Nat was pointing to. But again, this group has been known for many, many years. Their strength is not a surprise. The speed at which they conducted the operations was a surprise. I think that there was definitely misplaced confidence in the Iraqi security forces. When you spend that kind of money, again, $25 billion, and that kind of time in giving them such good equipment over the years, you expect them to be able to stand up. It's the Afghan military that we have been fearful of breaking up and not performing well. We felt that the Iraqi security forces were pretty significant and decent, though there were certainly reports by internal inspectors over the last few years that said, in fact, many of the brigades and larger units within the military were not in good shape in Iraq. So we had called out this weakness within the Iraqi security forces for some time.
And again, the website cis.org. Let's try to get in one more call in our last minute here. Sandy in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, on our line for Republicans. Sandy, quickly here.
Yes, my question is about the seemingly increasing radicalization of people in mosques in our country. And I don't get out a whole lot, but 7 years ago, I was on a little shuttle bus down in Baltimore going to a hospital, and the young driver mentioned that he was having a lot of trouble, and as it turned out, he just told the two of us, my sister and I, on the bus, that it was because people at his mosque were asking him to do things that he didn't want to do. He certainly didn't get into it, but we can see from our bombing in Boston and in Oklahoma, and the Somalians from Minnesota that are going overseas, and they don't really, as you mentioned, they don't have to go overseas. And we have more people, it seems, who can fall very easily into this trap of finding a new way of life and an important way of life.
Sandy, want to give Thomas Sanderson a chance to respond and also encourage you to stick around for our next segment of the Washington Journal, in which we're going to be talking specifically about some of those issues. But Mr. Sanderson.
Sure. America has great advantage that Muslim communities in the country are very well integrated and a part of American life to a degree much, much higher than in Europe and in other places. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean we're not going to have some people who are radicalized by what they see on TV, what they read on the internet, and potentially what they hear from a cleric. I will point out that the caller identifies a couple of attacks that were perpetrated by Muslims, but the Oklahoma City attack, of course, was perpetrated by a former U.S. Army soldier who was a Christian, Timothy McVeigh. But you do not need to travel to the battle space to be radicalized and to want to strike back against the United States. Those individuals will exist in any country. It's important for communities to help identify those individuals and report them to the police if they are recruiting people for violent activity. But generally speaking, we are in much better shape, but does not mean we don't have to be vigilant. At a time of conflict like this, when we have U.S. forces engaged in the region, we do need to be more careful.
Thomas Sanderson is with CSIS. It's csis.org if you want to check out their work. We appreciate your time this morning. Up next on the Washington Journal, we'll talk to the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council here in the U.S. about Islam and the American Muslim community. And later, our Big Ten college tour continues as we take viewers to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to talk with the University of Michigan's president there. But first, a news update from C-SPAN Radio.
It's 8:32 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the latest U.S.-led coalition airstrikes on Islamic State group positions in Syria included hits on a grain silo and the entrance to a Conoco gas operation, but that facility itself was not damaged. Activists say bombs fell in 4 provinces in northern and eastern Syria, causing an undetermined number of casualties. Well, we'll hear more about the U.S. airstrikes in Syria today when Major General Jeffrey Harrigan, Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, briefs the media at the Pentagon. We'll have live coverage at 1 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN television and here on C-SPAN radio. Turning to the economy, a quarterly survey by the National Association for Business Economics shows members predicting steady growth the rest of the year and into next year. They also see weakness in consumer spending and investments in homes because of Americans' lagging wage growth and trouble obtaining loans. And an update on the situation in Ferguson, Missouri reports this morning that officials are charging nearly 10 times the cost of some of their own employees' salaries for records relating to the fatal shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown. The city has demanded high fees to produce copies of records that, under Missouri law, it could provide free if it determined the material was in the public's interest to see. The Associated Press says that price gouging for government files is one way that local, state, and federal agencies have responded to requests for potentially embarrassing information they may not want released. And those are some of the latest headlines on C-SPAN Radio.
Our Campaign 2014 debate coverage continues live on C-SPAN Tuesday night at 9 Eastern for the final Texas governor's debate between State Senator Democrat Wendy Davis and State Attorney General Republican Greg Abbott. And live Thursday night at 8 Eastern, the Oklahoma governor's debate between State Representative Democrat Joe Dorman and the incumbent governor Republican Mary Fallin. Also at 8 on C-SPAN 2, watch the Nebraska governor's debate between Democrat Chuck Hasselbrook and Republican Pete Ricketts. C-SPAN's Campaign 2014, more than 100 debates for the control of Congress.
Tonight on The Communicators, Federal Trade Commissioner Maureen Olhausen on net neutrality, privacy, and data security.
Big data is a tool, and it can be used well and it can be used poorly. There are many benefits that can come from big data, consumer benefits. I think there'll be great new insights in certain areas, well, many areas, but some that are top of mind for me are in healthcare, in other kinds of research and reaching underserved populations, in providing new insights, I think in some of our more difficult to solve problems that we face as a society. But are there risks from big data as well? I think that's true. I think that you can take pieces, previously kind of separate pieces of information and assemble them into a profile that may give sensitive insights into a consumer. And the question for me is, you have all these benefits and you have some risks. What do you do then?
Tonight at 8 Eastern on The Communicators on C-SPAN 2.
Washington Journal continues.
And we're joined now by Salam Al-Marayati. He's the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And we're going to have a discussion on Islam and the American Muslim community amid the backdrop of the U.S.-led military effort against ISIS and other jihadist groups. And Mr. Al-Marayati, we've had calls already today as we've been discussing this subject from viewers concerned about radicalization of American Muslims. How concerned are you about that scenario in light of ISIS efforts?
Well, if one person falls prey to these violent extremist recruiters, that's one too many. Of course, this is a serious problem. The reality is that these people that do turn towards violent extremism are doing so outside the mosques. And so we have to have healthy conversations in the mosques to see how we can reach these unreachables. But at the same time, these are a handful of people. We are concerned about it. And at the same time, we believe that the best thing we can do is to fortify the partnership we've had with law enforcement and also foster even stronger relations throughout civil society.
You've written that the key to defeating ISIS is Islam. Explain what you mean by that.
Islam means life, ISIS means death. Islam means mercy, ISIS means cruelty. It's very simple. And anyone that has any kind of elementary education about Islam knows the difference. And if anything, what we see in ISIS is there may be Muslims there, but it is not Islam. What we feel Islam has done to contribute to civilization is being tarnished by groups like ISIS. And so we feel that on the one hand, we have to set the record straight. On the other hand, we know that there is a grave danger in groups like ISIS rising not only to the region, but in terms of the narrative throughout the world. And President Obama was correct. He said what groups like ISIS do very effectively is they exploit grievances of people, but they lure them into thinking that fighting the way they're fighting in such gruesome and cruel manner and barbaric really is the way to fight evil. Islam says to respond to evil with good. So there are so many points in Islam that we can actually use as an antidote to the ideology of ISIS. And we also know, and I think many military experts have said, that we cannot defeat ISIS militarily. We have to deal with the ideas. And so it is a battle of ideas, and we feel that American Muslims have that ability to help in this war on terror.
You bring up President Obama talked about some of these issues last week at his speech before the United Nations General Assembly. Here's a bit from that speech in which he called on Muslims to speak out against extremist ideology.
It is time for the world, especially Muslim communities, to explicitly, forcefully, and consistently reject the ideology of organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIL. It is one of the tasks of all great religions to accommodate, devote faith with a modern, multicultural world. No children are born hating, and no children anywhere should be educated to hate other people. There should be no more tolerance of so-called clerics who call upon people to harm innocents because they're Jewish, or because they're Christian, or because they're Muslim. It is time for a new compact among civilized peoples of this world to eradicate war at its most fundamental source, and that is the corruption of young minds by violent ideology.
Salam Al-Marayati is the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, joining us. After that speech, do you think enough Muslims are speaking up against jihadism?
Well, I think we'll call this violent extremism, and one thing we have to be very clear about, we shouldn't be countering jihad. We should restore the classical meaning of jihad. Jihad to the violent extremist means holy war, but jihad in classical Islamic terms means struggle. So let us at least not use religious terminology in fighting groups like ISIS. It just plays into their hands. They want this to be a war on Islam, a war on religion. We should be at war at criminal behavior, war against terrorism. So rather than dealing with these religious terms, I think we have to isolate them from mainstream Muslim communities. And what I think the president is talking about in terms of violent ideologies, let's face it, there are people in the region of the Middle East that sponsored groups like ISIS. There are groups and powers in the Middle East that have these ideas. And so when we are talking about a battle of ideas, we should confront those groups in the Middle East. And I think American Muslims have that ability to do that. We have the ability to steer the conversation in a different direction so that young minds are not corrupted, so that people's grievances are not exploited, so that we set the record clear on what Islam is, and we show that American Muslims are part of the solution.
For folks unfamiliar with your group, what is the Muslim Public Affairs Council?
The Muslim Public Affairs Council is aimed at helping to integrate Islam and Muslims within American pluralism so that we become a vibrant and effective group in helping on public policy issues such as countering violent extremism, religious freedom, human rights and democracy in the Muslim world, and also enhance the understanding of Islam to the American public.
And how many American Muslims are there in this country?
There's estimated between 3 and 6 million. No one really knows. But the fact is there are Muslims in every sector of society now, whether it is in the arts or the sciences, in technology. And so we see more Muslims being involved in civil society. And we want that to be a positive contribution to the challenges that we're facing today in the 21st century.
Salam Al-Marayati joins us for about the next 40 minutes or so to take your questions and comments. Our phone lines are open if you have questions for him. Kevin is up first in Stafford, Virginia, on our line for Republicans. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning. There's a lot of dancing around the words of what this terrorism is. First of all, Timothy McVeigh didn't have anything to do. He didn't do that act in the name of Christianity. Timothy McVeigh did that act in the tradition of the government's too big and he was against the government. Had nothing to do with his religion. All of the acts of terror that we see in the world today, including the one with chopping off the girl's head just the other day, are in the name of Islam. And I'm almost done here. I want to make a couple points. The jihadists, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call them, I know, sir, you are a Muslim, but I'll tell you, these people will kill you just as quickly as they will kill me. This is in the name of Islam. And when I say dancing around the words, the point I'm trying to make is you can't hide from that. President Obama hides from it, refuses to say what it really actually is.
Mr. Al-Marayati.
Well, first of all, we understand that ISIS is ready to kill Muslims. In fact, they've killed more Muslims than anyone else. Their objective is ideological cleansing. They have an ideology that basically declares Muslims as apostates and as infidels. So we understand that problem very well, more than anyone else. Number two, anyone can use labels. There are religious groups in every religion, really, that uses labels, but the reality is when they violate the number one rule in all religions, and that is to protect life, then they're going against the tenets of the faith. And that's our point. In other words, rather than reacting to ISIS with fear and with outrage, what we're calling for is more leadership in America to expose the forgery of ISIS. ISIS is a mafia. It doesn't conduct any martyrdom operations. It is conducting criminal operations. And so let's just set the record clear and straight on that issue. Number two, what we're saying is by shedding light on the issue, it will help us as Americans create more leadership in dealing with groups like ISIS more effectively. The reality is we have bombed Iraq the past 4 administrations, and it has not helped us in terms of creating stability in the region. It has not helped us strategically. So we need to do something else besides airstrikes. And what we're saying is we need a campaign to expose the forgery of ISIS, and that is a campaign of ideas, that is a campaign of raising voices of the American Muslim community. Anybody can do anything in the name of religion, but when that act is an act of terrorism and an act of criminality, a criminal behavior, then let us not validate that act with any religion.
And is that effort that you're talking about one that should be led from the Muslim community? Is there a way that the government can help in this effort?
Absolutely. That's a great question. There are American Muslims who are speaking out against this. I believe 120 scholars issued a letter last week that is basically deconstructing and exposing ISIS. We ourselves have had several press conferences on that issue, but it doesn't get the media attention that it needs. And so we need support from our civic and faith partners, from our government, from media, so that that voice becomes the predominant voice. And we expose ISIS for what it is, and that is we render it the marginalization that it deserves, really. It should not be the predominant voice for Muslims. We, the American Muslim community, and the Muslim mainstream communities throughout the world should be that predominant voice.
Kathleen's up next, calling in from Pompano Beach, Florida, on our line for Democrats. Kathleen, good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to open up Pandora box. How about that? I'm an African American. How does this sound to you? Hebrew, Israel, tribe of Judah, forever.
All right, we'll go on to Bowie, Maryland. Ola is calling in on our line for Republicans. Ola, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Good, good. First of all, I'd like to thank your guest for coming on, and I'd like to thank you for appropriately identifying Democrats as Democrat and not Democratic. So thanks for that. They're Democrats. They're part of the Democratic Party. I'm a Republican. I grew up in a two-religion household. My mom's Christian. My dad is Muslim. Read the Quran back and forth. And I chose to be a Christian for a particular reason. But that's neither here nor there. But just by way of background, I wanted to give you a guest a sense of the fact that I know what it is that I speak of. When you first opened the statement, you said radicalization is not happening in the mosque. That is wrong. It does happen in certain mosques, and I have visited certain mosques, although I am a Christian. So we need to confront that fact. Two, the first gentleman that came on said you were dancing around words, and you are dancing around words. The idea is that all the terroristic activities that has occurred in this particular world over probably the last 20 years has been done in the name of Islam. That doesn't necessarily mean that the faith of Islam is bad. That doesn't necessarily mean that the faith of Islam particularly is violent. It just so happens that everyone that happens to be a major terrorist or has performed a major terrorist act over the last 20 years happens to be Muslim. So for Muslims have to really confront the fact that there's something within the religion or something within their clerics that they're pulling out of the religion that is allowing people to do what it is that they do. I understand socioeconomic impacts, and I understand the fact that you do have people that are disenfranchised. But for people to kill people in droves, And then for one religion that has seemingly produced most of those people to say it's not Islam, there has to be a reckoning of the fact that there's something within the teaching of the faith, and allowing some of these clerics to come on and spread this kind of propaganda all the time.
All right, Mr. Al-Marayati, do you want to respond?
Well, I don't want to get into debate about, religion and extremism. I think that we can go to the Israeli settlements and find just as vile and vitriolic rhetoric amongst the settlers there. And we also have grievances by Muslims that talk about how they have lost so many lives by Western powers. But we don't need to go into that point. The question that I think these people are having is, are there Muslim clerics that are spreading this ideology? And the answer is yes. And we need to confront those clerics. And we need to confront that ideology. But there's no other way to do that than to have Muslims confront them. So we, the American Muslim community, are part of that solution. We are being asked by the U.S. government to help in the counter-narrative against groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So the reality is we have to work together. And rather than blaming religion, when you blame religion, what you're actually doing is playing into the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That's their propaganda. Their propaganda is that America is at war with Islam. And for people here to just say, well, we have Muslims who are at war against America and are using religion, that's true. But let us not fall into that trap that we are actually going to go to war against a religion to deal with this problem. Some people think that the solution is to suck Islam out of the Muslim world. Well, good luck if you think that that's going to work. It's not going to work. We have to engage Muslims in the region. We have to deal with this cult of death, with this ideology, with the theology of life, with religion. And to us, that's our suggestion, and that's our idea. If anybody has a better idea to confront this ideology, we're open to these suggestions. But the reality is, and I think everybody knows it, we have to have Muslims fighting this battle of ideas.
Thomas Shipman asks on our Twitter page, what are the common grievances that draw people toward joining radical groups?
Well, the common grievances, of course, is the violation of the rights of Palestinians. That's usually on top of the list, and how the West has completely turned a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians, how the West has only sided with tyrants in the Middle East, and now we have secular tyrants and tyrants that use religion in the Middle East, and some of them are our strongest allies, and some of them actually sponsor this kind of ideology that we find in groups like ISIS. And so the third complaint would be this double standard, that if these groups are allies, then we turn a blind eye to their human rights violations. And if they are not allies, then we go and bomb the whole region. These are the grievances. And what we're saying to our community and what we're saying to policymakers is we need to have healthy conversations about these issues. And let's have the healthy conversations in the mosque. Let us invite more young people to have these conversations. Let us not ostracize these people outside the mosque so that they only get this information on the internet. And that basically leads to a higher propensity for being exposed to the Al-Qaeda ideology or ISIS ideology without someone to talk to them about these kinds of issues. Let us channel the energy of young people who are concerned about these issues towards constructive, nonviolent means of dealing with these policy grievances. These are serious issues, but we have to have these conversations with our policymakers, with our community, with young people, with people who convert to Islam, so they are not continuously fooled by the propaganda that they see from groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Sam's up next, calling in from New York on our line for Independence. Sam, good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, okay. No, I've been listening at keeping up with what's going on in the world, as far as the terrorism is concerned. And like the other caller mentioned, that a lot of these terrorists, they claim to be Islam. In fact, I have a nephew who's Islam. He even takes the Hajj to Mecca and so forth. But here's the question I got to ask you: in the Islamic faith, is there any policy of disowning these people? Like I'm talking about excommunication. Like putting them out of the religion, that they're not Muslim. Could that help to curtail this terrorism if they're disowned as Muslims?
Well, in fact, many Muslim scholars have said that ISIS is not a state. We will not recognize it, and it is not Islam. So we will not even recognize it as any legitimate Islamic group. It has been delegitimized by Muslim scholars throughout the world. The reality is ISIS has guns. ISIS has some kind of military power. Now they have revenue. So they are a reality. And they're a reality that we'll have to deal with. But the fact is, in time, we will deal with that issue if more Muslim communities are empowered and become the predominant voice to the world. ISIS is trying to terrorize people and gaining attention as a result, and then spreading intimidation and fear to get more power in the region. We cannot be fearful of that. We have to confront that. Excommunicating them from the religion, it's been done. Not in the way other religions do, but they have been delegitimized. But the reality is there are going to have to be some changes in the region before groups like ISIS are going to be marginalized, and mainly groups that have sponsored this kind of ideology, groups that have financed this kind of ideology, and we need to expose that as well.
We've heard a lot about ISIS efforts to instill Sharia law in the areas that they control. What is Sharia law?
Well, Sharia just simply means the path to God. Shara means the road, and so in classical Islamic terms, it's the path to God. It has become the corpus of Islamic law, but it's a complex system of jurisprudence, similar to Judaism. However, there are 5 simple goals of Sharia that have been agreed upon by all Islamic scholars with unanimity. And that is, number 1, to protect and preserve life, to preserve freedom of expression, freedom of faith, to have property, the right to property, and the right to family. And so when you look at those classical goals in Islamic law and you compare them, or you measure groups that claim Islam, whether it's ISIS or any other group, the fact that they don't protect life, they kill life, already disqualifies them from having any kind of legitimacy in terms of Sharia or Islamic law. Like Judaism, the Quran says that when you save a human life, it's as if you save all of human civilization, and when you kill a human life, it's as if you've killed all of human civilization. So the enormity of killing innocent human beings is very grave in Islam. It's a major sin. And so anyone that goes around and just casually kills people, beheads people, dismembers people, and displays their parts on streets, I don't see that. Forget about religion. It's not even human. They're not even close to being human. So this is very barbaric. And really, we as Muslims are very disturbed when somebody uses our religion to try to justify that kind of barbarism.
Worcester, Ohio is next. Bonnie is calling in on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Bonnie.
Good morning. I just so totally disagree with everything this man is saying. I was studying the Quran yesterday, and if you study the Quran, you are totally totally misleading the people on this program, because Surah, if you read Surah, it says you are to behead those who do not believe. The ISIS and the Muslim radicals, or whatever you want to call, are actually doing what the Quran has instructed them to do. Also, Muhammad said, you know, if lying justifies the means of what you're trying to achieve, then that is okay to lie. And this is what you are doing. You are lying right now. You are like saying that the Muslims want to be peaceful. No, they don't. They don't. That the whole motive is to have an Islamic Muslim world.